Good afternoon. My name is Steven Hernandez, and I'm the Executive Director of the Legislature's Nonpartisan Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, Equity, and Opportunity. I am here today with my co-chair, the Honorable Robin Porter, to conduct a virtual town hall meeting on women erased, when they lead and when they suffer. Today, we're going to focus on the often erased or forgotten women, including women of color, trans women, and women with disabilities, who have faced interpersonal or official abuse and violence, and the unsung women who have led the charge for transparency, validation, accountability, and reform. Robin, as you know, you and I had a conversation, often have conversations about how in the through threads of public policy that you and I work on, oftentimes forgotten or erased are the names and the voices of the women who are often the leaders in these spaces, either in their origination or in their execution. So today we thought we'd bring together a panel of some of those leaders to talk about the issue of bringing the names of women to light, the women who lead and the women who struggle to make a difference, not only in the state of Connecticut, but in the country. So I am honored to turn to our very first panelist, Teresa Younger. Teresa is not only the leader at the Ms. Foundation, but she is a daughter of Connecticut who led for many, many years the Permanent Commission on the Status of Women. We're so proud to be here with you today, Teresa, and we welcome you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be in a conversation with my home state, Connecticut, where I have spent so many years, and now on the national level, having an opportunity to see how all these issues tie together. And when I was reached out to about this conversation today, I said yes, because the conversation's critical and the conversation needs to happen now. And this week, we have seen so much. So thank you so much for having me. I'm going to make my comments probably way too long, but I'll try to keep them short. And I just want to say to all the other panelists on this call today, it is a pleasure to see you, my friends, and thank you so much for being part of this conversation. You all have taught me about the work that I do on a national level, and I miss working with you so much. So I just want to put that out there. At the Ms. Foundation for Women, we believe in building women's collective power across the United States. Our vision for our work is that we believe in a safe and just world where power and possibility are not limited by race, gender, class, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, or disability. We believe that equity and inclusion are the cornerstones of a true democracy in which the worth and dignity of every person is valued. So for us, this conversation today just rang so true. We're intentional in our vision to call in the groups that we think most need to be heard. So I want to just give a few words about where we are today. You can't make up these times we're in. If anybody had asked me to write what was going to happen in 2020, I would tell you it would not look like this. And I feel for all of us in all that we are doing. But this week, I have to say, my heart is lifted just so slightly in the moment that we have seen as women's voices have been lifted up as we celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And then we saw the selection of the first multiracial woman vice presidential candidate this country has ever seen. But this week is not reflective of what is happening in America. Women's stories, voices, faces, particularly women of color and trans women of color, are often missing from the narrative. And even though they have been leading and continue to lead almost every single social justice movement in this country, we often are not talked about. There are many names that are missing, and you'll hear from many of the speakers today about the names and who is missing from the conversation. But we can go back to Mary Church Terrell, Connecticut's own Constance Baker Motley, Shirley Chisholm. We can go back to those who are missing from the storylines now, like Breonna Taylor, or Kayla Moore, or Rekia Boyd. We can go back to so many names that are no longer with us, And the names that are so silenced, the names we just don't know because they're not written into the story. Across the nation, freedom-fighting women are ushering in a new era of feminism and leadership in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, in the mass unrest, in the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Tony McCabe. Often these women have gone unsung and underfunded in the work that they are trying to do. In Minneapolis, at the site of George Floyd's murder, Candace Montgomery of Black Visions Collective was rallying her community around an alternative solution to the destructive criminal justice system. Tony Michelle Williams from Atlanta is working in Solutions Not Punishment Collective, is developing leadership for transgender people of color. And in Alaska, Native Voices' own Eni Bengay is tackling climate change by fending off the drilling efforts of oil companies. These women, particularly women of color, are doing this work and so much more in their communities. This moment in time is asking us and charging us to see how all of these issues are constantly intertwined. We cannot talk about voices without expressing and supporting the experiences that come with them. We talk about women on so many levels, and yet we forget that they are part of what makes our society tick. And I say we consciously forget because women are around us all the time. And yet when we went to talk about essential workers of COVID, we forgot to talk about the fact that women were on the front lines of everything that is happening. We quickly talk about the front lines on military, but we don't talk about the front lines of those who are working in our grocery stores, delivering our mail, taking care of our community members. It is the women who are working in nursing homes who are getting paid minimum wage and don't even have health insurance themselves. It is the women who are working on the front lines and checking out our groceries, who are getting paid barely minimum wage and yet are expected to show up to work and don't have childcare in their homes. It is the increase of sexual assault and domestic violence that we are seeing in our homes. When the government made the decision to tell people to stay home, they did it from a very closed perspective of recognizing the impact that would have. So we have children who are constantly being sexually abused at home with their abusers, and women and folks who are being abused at home with their abusers. And we've seen a drop in the reporting because the mandated reporters are no longer able to see those folks. When we closed the doors, we also said to folks, you cannot come out of your home, but we didn't make space for those who needed to get out of their home and what that would look like. Social unrest and the rise in the social in the awareness of around racial justice in this country has us talking about a whole bunch of things, but not necessarily seeing how they all tie together. This is a time when all of us are going to have to step forward in the work that we are doing. Across this country and in the state of Connecticut, we are going to continue to require to bring together the voices of those most impacted. And it is not a validation of their stories. Their stories are their lived experiences and the expertise that they bring to the table. But it will be incumbent upon us as we rebuild America in this moment that we remember to have those voices at the table, the voices of those most marginalized, the names we don't know, and we need to say them. We need to call them out. We need to invite them in, and we need to thank them for the work that they are doing. One of the best parts about my job at the Ms. Foundation is that I meet quote unquote badass women every day around the country who are doing really amazing work. These are oftentimes the women that we don't know. These are oftentimes the folks who are making impact in their communities. These are the people who have the commitment, the courage, and the conviction to do what needs to be done. They are the ones who are staying up till 3 a.m. and writing grants. They are the ones who are answering calls. They are the ones who are carrying the torch. This is a moment in time for America to step up. It's a moment in time for Connecticut to step up. It's a moment in time for philanthropy to step up. We all have a job and a task to do. I want to leave with just this one little bit of information. In this country, philanthropy makes a commitment to many different causes. But when it comes to investing in women and girls of color-led organizations in this country, they are investing 0.5% of all philanthropic dollars. In this country, that means that women of color are getting invested in at $5.48. And yet we are on the front lines of almost every social justice movement this country has ever seen in every single area. And so now is the time for us to call in, all of us, to the table or eliminate the table for the conversations we need to have. Now is the time for a real investment in what we want to have, and to recognize that every single day there are feminists across this country doing the work that needs to be done. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this conversation today, and I thank everybody for all they are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I think you have very aptly named the panel the badass panel. So I think we're going to keep that. So welcome, and thank you again for painting, I think, a tapestry of leadership and presence across the country that is so critical to understand deeply, and understand deeply because of the impact that it has on every single one of our lives in empowering and in moving all of us forward. So thank you for that, Teresa. I'm going to turn now to the rest of our panel. I'm going to identify each of you in the order in which you appear on my screen, just so that I don't lose track of you. And I'm going to start with Debbie Greenwood. Debbie Greenwood is CEO and President of the Center for Family Justice, and she devotes her professional life to supporting the health and well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. It's an honor to be with such an esteemed group of individuals, and wonderful to see so many friends as well. Thank you.
Debbie, I'm going to start with you and just give you the space to reflect on what it means to you to be in a space where you lead, and so many of the panelists here lead, where women are often erased and forgotten in their leadership and in their struggle.
Thank you, Stephen. So I've been in the nonprofit world 41 years, actually this past July, and worked for a national nonprofit. It's been a nonprofit ride and journey my entire career, while raising my three daughters, who are now mothers themselves. And having the experience and the opportunity, the last 13 of those 41 years has been to work at the Center for Family Justice. In 1997, our agency, located in Bridgeport, Connecticut, our largest city in our state, and identified as lowest income and poorest. I will tell you that working with victims of domestic violence, sexual violence, and children that are affected by abuse are the three core issues that we address. Though we started as a YWCA in 1895, we are now celebrating 125 years of serving the greater Bridgeport community. Living in the same community that I serve has really made it personal. And what do I mean by that? Women that I've worked with throughout my career, from the national organization to now leading the Center for Family Justice. When I first got there, one of the things we were doing really led to asking the question that goes something like this: why is it a victim of abuse needs to go through our system 7 to 10 times before she actually can leave the abusive situation? And the biggest question is, did she actually get the opportunity to leave? Many losing their lives, losing their children, not having financial resources. And this was the same story, whether it was a woman from the inner city or a woman from a suburban town. And looking at women that were discounted, and that horrific question that kept coming before my purview, that went, why doesn't she just leave? Well, Of course, we all now today, everyone on this panel understands why. She has lost the ability for financial abuse and so forth. So looking at women that were being erased in our communities, and looking at the breakdown of individuals, and 92% of the women that we serve every year, which totals anywhere from 7 to now reaching numbers of 9,000 in just 6 communities. In our state of Connecticut, last year we served almost 40,000 individuals. Again, 90% of that total were female. So what happens? So the issue was, we need to do better. We need to do better. And I love the word you used, Teresa, being a badass. I got angry, and it became personal, because every person that came through our doors or called those hotlines, or the people you meet in your community that would say, I can't, because what am I going to do? How am I going to take care of my kids? I'm going to lose them. I'll lose my home. I won't be able to pay my rent. How can I feed my children? It was usually about that. And it became very apparent we needed to bring resources to Bridgeport to work with nonprofits in our community. And every nonprofit we asked said yes. We have 22 nonprofits that are experts in their area. We found a national model that had been around since 2002. And it all started from 1994, when the Violence Against Women Act came into our country. And we looked at women that were identifying, whether they were transgender, LGBTQ, what was happening to them. We needed to work with different nonprofits that were doing this core work, break those silos down, and look at models that were working. And I will be honest with you, it was not an easy process. What do I mean by that? When you're doing something that is out of the box, bells and whistles, people will look at it saying, that doesn't work. How could it work? Using statistical data and information, but listening to victims of abuse, whether it was sexual violence, individuals, and people that didn't have what they needed, including getting free legal support. Because when you're going into court unrepresented, the story changes completely. So we're talking about women that were there because their lives depended on it, whether it was to lose their children, lose their livelihood, or whatever it meant to them. What is it that you need? Most of the answers were similar, but some were also different. So it was not a cookie cutter. And I will proudly say that in 2016, we opened Connecticut's first one-stop shop, a horrific way to describe it, but under one roof. You now come through our doors and you get everything you need. So that 7 to 10 times becomes 2 to 3, reducing the homicides that we're seeing, everything being free and confidential, and working really, really hard for those women that have been erased in our communities because they don't have the assets and the resources. In addition to that, it's not just a crisis anymore. I need to help you rebuild your life. That means self-sufficiency, finding jobs, finding a resource to put food on your table, help you find that childcare. And yep, one might say, who the hell wants to do all this additional work? Well, I'll tell you, we do at the Center for Family Justice. And we're proud of that work, and we're not done by any stretch of the imagination, because the survivors that come through our doors are now those peer mentors, helping the new people that come through our doors in Bridgeport. And we're helping other parts of our state and other parts of our country, helping support them as well, to say, how can I do this and where do I start? We have a lot of work to do, and it will take a village to help the women that have been erased come forward. And Teresa, you said it very well. These are names of people that are not famous. They are people that have come from our disabled population, that are underrepresented, and they need those extra supports. So we need to make sure that they have a voice, even if they can't speak themselves. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to passionately be part of today's program.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Next, we'll turn to Melissa Marshall. Melissa has spent her entire career dedicating herself to obtaining equal access for people with all types of disabilities. Melissa, I'd like to start by just noting one of the comments that you made on the chat, which is, why isn't there simultaneous interpretation for people who can't hear, for people who are deaf? As I understand, one of the benefits of having CTN is CTN does close caption for us. So that will be available in the rebroadcast. I hope it's also available live. But you raise a good point to start, Melissa, and I'm honored to turn to you.
This is Melissa. Thank you so much, Stephen. And I'm glad to be here today. And I'm really glad that CTN has closed captioning, and I'm aware of that. But for people whose native language is American Sign Language, captioning is presented in a language in which they might not be fluent. I might be a person with a PhD who's deaf, whose native language is sign. Just like I could be a person with PhD whose native language is English, who only speaks English. So captioning doesn't do it, and particularly in these times. So that's something that the state needs to really take into consideration. And we're talking about making tables if we need to. I would ask you to make sure 30 years after the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we celebrated this summer, that 30 years after the passage of the ADA, we start making the tables for women and people with disabilities accessible. So what I want to talk about is erasure on an individual level and on a systemic level, and some of the unsung heroes. Unfortunately, some of the unsung heroes are past. The first woman that I talk about whenever I have the opportunity is a woman named Edie Harris. Edie Harris was a double amputee. She didn't have legs. She was a grandmother. And when I started working with her and hired her, she was in her 60s. The other thing she did in her 60s was she started being frustrated that buses weren't accessible. It's 30 years ago. And one day, Edie was exhausted and tired and said, wait, if I can't get on this bus, nobody's getting on this bus. And she held on to the bus. She got arrested in Connecticut and I think 20 other states. And she was one of Connecticut's real unsung heroes before the passage of the ADA. And she was fighting for our rights. And it's not this fun, sexy thing getting arrested. She was risking her life. She was subject to police brutality. That was really huge. So I want to recognize Edie Harris by name, even though she's no longer with us. I know she's with us in spirit right now. And also Makita Evans. And Makita was someone who, when we get arrested for doing civil disobedience, trying to make buses accessible, I get arrested for doing civil disobedience periodically, most recently in the governor's office, but that's another story. But when Makita was arrested, she was the one who said, I'm going to jail. We all went to jail overnight, then signed a promise to appear. Makita's like, no, I'm not signing a promise to appear. The purpose of doing civil disobedience is to force you to make the jail system accessible and to clog up your system. Why would I sign a promise to appear? Why would I leave the jail system? And Makita stayed in jail and went to Niantic, risking her health, risking her life. And so I want to honor Makita Evans and Edie Harris, two of our unsung heroes. And there are many, many, many more. It was women with disabilities who helped save the Affordable Care Act. One more person I'm going to state by name, who is no longer with us, is Carrie Ann Lucas. And Carrie Ann went into Cory Gardner's office and said, I'm staying until you see me. And they said, we won't let you use the bathroom. And she said, we're a member of a group that does civil disobedience, adapt, and we're people with disabilities. We'll figure it out if you won't let us use the bathroom. We'll go without using the bathroom. We'll use the bathroom. We're still going to do the things we're going to do, and we're not leaving the office. So people with disabilities who help save the ADA, especially women. One of the things I'm most concerned and passionate about right now is I'm with the Connecticut Cross Disability Lifespan Alliance, but I'm also the Director of Operations for the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. And we work to make sure that people with disabilities have their civil rights and liberties protected during disasters. So I'm working 7 days a week on the COVID-19 pandemic. And what you need to understand is that women with disabilities are literally being erased from the planet, from this country, disproportionately. And of course, as is always the case, Black women and other women of color are dying at higher rates. Right now, 0.6% of the population lives in nursing homes, nursing facilities, I should say. They're not homes. 0.6% of the population lives in facilities. Guess what percentage of deaths that represents? 42%. In Washington state, deaths in nursing homes represent 56%. People of color are disproportionately institutionalized. Women are disproportionately institutionalized. Women of color are doubly disproportionately institutionalized. And what I want to remind everyone is that every single person in a nursing facility or an assisted living facility is a disabled person. You don't go to a nursing home because you're old. First of all, there's lots of young people in nursing homes. Secondly, people go to nursing homes because they can't get supports in the community. The system has failed them. So I don't suffer from my disability. Nobody suffers from a disability. What we suffer from is systematic ableism. And that's something that needs to be addressed. But literally, people are dying as we speak. And that is really frightening. That's something I'm committed to every day. Understand it's poor women that are dying more. It's the women that work in the nursing homes, but it's the women that are also it's the women that are forced to work in the nursing homes and the women that are forced to live in nursing homes, especially Black women and women of color in nursing homes. That's something we need to deal with. That's something we need to deal with right now as a state. A study was done. I'm about to read that study about what went wrong. As far as I can tell, having heard about the study but not looked at it, so don't quote me on this, even though it's just a few of us in Facebook Live land. The study doesn't take into account people with disabilities and the legal obligation of the state of Connecticut to ensure that people are given services in the most integrated setting appropriate. And that's not nursing homes and other institutions. So thank you all.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you for so elegantly confronting the dominant narrative, because that really is part of our task here, is to take the dominant narrative head on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next, I'm going to turn to Brittany Yancey, Assistant Professor of Humanities. Professor Yancey is an intersectional scholar activist and committed to fighting for a gender-inclusive movement for racial justice. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Thank you so much for having me. I just look across the screen and I'm just so inspired by all who are gathered here. Just so inspired by this conversation. It is so timely. I come to this conversation not only as a historian, but I also come bringing in the room organizations that I belong to. One, 18-year member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And I raise that here because when we think about the events that have happened this week, you understand that our VP nominee is also a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha. And I think something very critical has happened here, that with the selection of Senator Kamala Harris, that you have this narrative that is changing, that is elevating the oftentimes Black women. When we think about, for example, the fact that this is the centennial year of the 19th Amendment, and we're looking at all of the women who have advanced the vote, and Black women and women of color have oftentimes get overlooked in that narrative. And I think with her selection, you're starting to hear the names that Teresa has already lifted. Mary Terrell, Mary Buckle Bethune, Constance Baker Motley. You're starting to hear organizations like my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, the Black sororities, National Association for Colored Women Clubs. All right, I see, you're starting to hear these organizations that are oftentimes overlooked and written out of history. And it's high time for us to be restored into this narrative, for you to know the history, for you to know these names. And so that's part of the work that I do as a historian who is committed to elevating Black women and women of color and restoring them to the historical record from an intersectional lens. I see that as part of a truth-telling tradition that drives my activist work. I also belong to a grassroots organization that has been newly formed here in Connecticut called CT Black Women, that has been led and organized by Pamela Selders, who is also a critical champion in this state. And so, I also belong to, and I'm bringing this in for a reason, to another national organization called the United States of Women, and I'm one of 3 Greater Hartford ambassadors that is working across this country with other ambassadors in other states that is really getting to the conversation of an intersectional movement for gender equity and racial justice. And so I come to this space holding space for all of the women who are working in these spaces that are oftentimes overlooked. But I also think it's really critical that the kind of work that I do is really trying to create that space and help reimagine movement building and organizing where Black women and women of color are seen and they are heard, they are championed, and they are supported. And one person that has been critically inspiring in that work is Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and her movement for Say Her Name. And I'm representing in my Say Her Name shirt that is really elevated the women who have been brutalized, who have been killed through state-sanctioned violence. And I just want to share my screen. Dr. Crenshaw is this landmark legal scholar that has a dual appointment at Columbia University and UCLA. We know her because she coined the term intersectionality, but what we don't really know is the history of the Say Her Name movement. We're hearing that a lot now. And in 2014, the African American Policy Forum that she co-founded, the families of some of the women who had been killed really came together and really launched this movement where we must say their names, we must know the narrative. And in 2015, you started to see greater efforts rolled out, and there was a report. And I encourage people to go to the African American Policy Forum website and read the Say Her Name report. I just want to share my screen here to elevate that. This report really gets at the heart of how women are completely erased from this conversation. When we talk about Black Lives Mattering, that we can go, that we can go through this movement and not know the names of a Rekia Boyd, a Michelle Cusseau, Ayanna Jones, Kayla Moore. Like, we can go through movements and not know their names. This is just an example. You can see this timeline, and you can see on the top row, you have the Black men who we have lost to police violence. And it goes across this timeline. This report chronicles, right, the way that Black women too have also been target of police violence, and we don't rally. We are silent. They don't garner the outcry. They don't garner the movements, the hashtags, right? So we must elevate them and say their names and recognize that this movement for Black lives has to be about all Black lives. And we have to say their name. I want to just give you an example of one person in particular. This is Kayla Moore. She was murdered by Berkeley police in February of 2013. She is a trans woman. And again, this is a conversation that we must have about police responding to someone in a mental health crisis. And how is it that that turns to death? When you really look at some of the women that are in this report, and more recent in particular, that these are women and people who are asking for help. So how does reaching out to the police, responding to a mental health crisis, end up in a murder, right? And so again, this is something that we must know her story. And this is just one of many examples. And this is why that report is so critical, because it chronicles the women. And this is just the more recent kind of timeline that goes back to 1984 with Eleanor Bumpus, right? And then brings it forward to Sandra Bland, right? But since Sandra Bland, we know that there's a score of women, right? Trans women, non-binary individuals who we have lost. And why don't we know their names? Right? Why are we organizing around an intersectional movement so we can elevate all the names? And so this is something that I'm very much committed to not only organizing and working with to secure justice, but to also to reframe this narrative so we know who they are, we know their story, and we know how important, right, that their lives do matter. So I just wanted to show that just quickly, just to really make the point. But, it's interesting because, again, there's all ways in which when we talk about the erasure of Black women, I want to give another example that some of you may remember. In 2015, a verdict came down against a police officer in Oklahoma, Daniel Holesclaw. And I think this is one that really just, I continue today to struggle with this particular incident. You have a police officer that between December of 2013 and 2014 sexually assaulted 13 Black women. Let me just repeat that. 13 Black women is sexually assaulted by a police officer, and there is no national outcry. No movement. There are individuals in a very small section, small cohort of activists that went to Oklahoma City, right? We missed that and we failed them. We did secure justice for them. Dr. Crenshaw, Attorney Ben Crump did rally behind these women, and their injustice was served. He is serving multiple lifetime sentences currently, but he was not convicted of all the charges. But what was really interesting about this is that this particular police officer targeted these 13 Black women because they were poor, sex workers, they were in the system. And he knew that no one was going to care, and he was going to be able to get rid of it. So what does that say when no one shows up for these women? And so that particular incident, even with him being convicted and serving time, it just really put in clear view, right, the way that when we are not really broadening our frames, right, when our movements aren't considering, when we allow the erasure to exist, that we leave women behind. We leave women behind. We leave them unnamed. We leave them unprotected. And this has dire consequences. When I think about, right, talking about erasure, when I think about, for example, the young girls, even in the state of Connecticut, who are pushed out, right? The push out movement is such a clear example, right, of how we miss it when we take this lightly. The push out movement of young, particularly Black girls and Latinx girls who are in schools, who are over disciplined, they are suspended, they are dismissed, they are expelled, they are victimized. There is violence against these young girls in school. They are arrested, right, at higher rates, 6 times their white counterparts. And how disruptive is that, right, for a young girl? And so, these are things that we don't discuss. And this is why we have to come together and have forums and conversations like this where we can elevate the names of all of the champions that have been elevated, right? And so my thing, if I were to kind of just move this conversation forward, is that I'm really hoping that in this moment where we are charged and everyone is interested in ensuring that Black lives matter, that we're talking about equity and justice. Steve, you made a point yesterday in a previous conversation where, this work is about human dignity and self-determination. That is the epitome of freedom, to be able to be self-determined and for your body, for you to live in your body and have control over it, to have protection over it, to be able to live in dignity is something we all deserve. And that is at the core of the intersectional work that I do, the organizations that I belong to, and at the core of the Say Her Name movement and all of the intersectional organizing happening across this country, to be able to live in dignity and be self-determined. And so we have to get behind organizations like Black Lives Matter. We have to get behind organizations like Movement for Black Lives, Sister Song, Girls for Gender Equity, the Black Women's Blueprint. These organizations that are on the ground doing the work. The state of Connecticut, there are organizations that are on the ground. I think about the movement that's happening in New Haven, CT Core, who is organizing, the ACLU, who is organizing, Women Against Mass Incarceration, and Tahiba Baines, who is just doing incredible work. CT Black Women, Amora Cultural Corner. I could just list all of the organizations and in Connecticut who are doing the work. And we have to support them. We have to invest. We have to rally. We have to raise the funds, right? When I think about behind me is Breonna Taylor. I had to bring her into this conversation because somehow she is being left behind in this movement already. It's already starting to get silent. It's already starting to kind of retreat from all of that action that was happening, a good 2 months ago. Now is the time, as Teresa said, to call in. We need to champion her right now. 161 days. No arrest, no accountability. 161 days. And I will remove all titles, all affiliations of the organizations that I belong to. As a Black woman, it's disrespectful, it's hurtful. For not only the Black women, but the Indigenous women and girls who go missing, who are assaulted at a very high rate, right? The women in the LGBTQ community who are overlooked and targeted and preyed upon and no action, right? All of the women, the Latina women who are also equally vulnerable, right? What does this say about being able to live in dignity and being self-determined? 161 days. We have to do better. And I will just end here. The United States of Women is currently working to organize a week of action for Breonna Taylor, and that will be coming forth next month. And I look forward to getting that word out and to sharing with all of you so you can be involved in that. We must secure justice for Breonna, all the Breonnas, all the Tony McDades, all of the unnamed women and girls and non-binary people who we don't know. And so I'll leave it there, and I look forward to furthering the conversation. So thank you.
Professor Yancey, thank you so much for saying their names in such an intentional way. Intentionality is so critical because it's very, very clear from everything that you've said that systems and institutions that push and marginalize women and girls are complicit in serving up women and girls to abuse and serving up women and girls to exploitation when they do so. So thank you so much, intentionally naming them. Thank you. Jay Brown, welcome, Jay Brown. I'd like to welcome Jay is a non-binary trans femme performer, theater artist, and advocate from the beautiful city of New York City, writing songs and creating music that celebrates unapologetically transness and transparency. Understanding that music is universal, but experiences are personal, and they're here to blend them together. Jay, I'm so excited to welcome you. If you could just unmute.
The Zoom 101, y'all. Well, first I have to say, Brittany, I got very emotional listening to you speak, because I like to open by kind of getting a feel for the people in the room who might or might not know. So I can see everybody on the live feed right now. So to my fellow esteemed panelists, if you know how many trans women have been murdered this year, I'd love if you raised your hand. You know, it's something that we talk about a lot, and I'm going to read their names because I like to begin my discussion of this by kind of imbuing this conversation with some tangibility and some responsibility, right? So Dustin Parker McAllister, Alexa Nulisa Luciano Ruiz, Yampi Mendez Arrocho, Monica Diamond, Lexi, Joanna Metzger, Penelope Diaz Ramirez, Leila Bailes Sanchez, Serena Angelique Velasquez Ramos, Nina Pop, Haley J. Oregon, Tony McDay, Dominique Remy Fells, Rhea Milton, Jane Thompson, Selena Reyes Hernandez, Brayla Stone, who was 17 years old, if I'm not mistaken, Mercy Mack, Shaki Peters, Bree Nook Black, Summer Taylor, Drea McCarty, Tatiana Hall, Marilyn Kazers, Tiffany Harris, Kashia D. Hardy, Brian Egypt Powers, and Asia Raquel Roan Spears. So it's important for me to let everybody know I'm 26 years old, and the life expectancy for a trans woman of color, a Black woman specifically, is 35. And it's interesting to me because when I think about the erasure of women at large, I often think about the ways that trans women are erased from conversations surrounding cisgender women at large. We often tend to focus solely on the cis women, which is also funny to me because 64 to 75,000 Black women and girls are missing in this country. We don't always talk about the things that we need to be talking about. So when I read these 28 names, these are the 28 names that people have fought to get into the media properly. These are names that often don't make the headlines because their families intervene. With Brayla Stone especially, I want to speak about her because being a minor, her family requested her chosen name, her trans name, not be used in media when they discovered her body. So she was misgendered for weeks on end before people were like, hey, you have to do this. To the point where I actually have a friend who called the news station and said her name was Brayla Stone. Why are you guys not calling her by her name? And the person inevitably hung up on my friend. This is the type of stuff that we're talking about when we're saying that there is an epidemic of death in trans women, especially Black trans women in this country. Most recently, something that has kind of shaken me and my community to the core is in Hollywood. I want to say about 3, maybe 2 nights ago, there was a vicious attack on 3 trans women. Eden, the doll, who I believe her actual last name is Estrada, Jocelyn Flawless, these 3 wonderful, beautiful women that, you know, under any other circumstances would probably be protected, were not. And instead, we're witnessing on camera people sexualizing them, people poking fun at them, while one of them was just literally hit in the head by somebody who tossed a scooter at them. Someone was being held with a crowbar to their face, being told that because she was trans, he was going to take her somewhere and kill her. So I think it's important that we be as transparent as possible with what is happening with trans women in this country and in the world at large. In the past 7 months alone are these 28 reported names. Last year, it was 26. So how is it that in less than a year, we've already beaten the mark from the year past? On average, we're talking about murdering something like 22 women regularly. And that's, you know, again, the names that we report. I want to highlight some people that we may or may not talk about, which is like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, And also talk about someone like Lucy Hicks Anderson, who, as a child, physicians in the early 20th century were telling her parents you should raise her as a girl. So I often feel that we surround the conversation of transness with a lot of mystique, as if being trans is something new, when there is literal documentation from as early as, I believe, the 15th century of conquistadors coming to the Americas and seeing what is in essence understood as two-spirit people working in opposite of what their expected gender roles would be. And in this documentation, these people saying we have to kill them, because if we don't kill them, then the word is going to get back across seas and it's just going to destroy everything that we know. Everything that the Bible tells us, everything that we use to control the world around us, this doesn't make natural sense. We have to destroy it. While to me, transness is one of the most natural things in the world. It is an essence, it is a spirit. And I think a big mistake that we often make is tying womanhood to femaleness. It does a disservice to cisgender women as well. And I kind of want to make sure that I say that explicitly, because the biggest narrative that people have to dishonor and disrespect trans women is talking about uteruses and other, biological body parts, when the weight and validity of women should never be placed on their ability to give birth and bring children into this world. So somebody, I believe her name is Hazel, a trans activist, used a great phrase, which was socialized woman. So I think it's also important for us to talk about the ways that this is perceived. I don't walk down the street worried about other people's genitals. I don't walk down the street worried about what this looks like and what that looks like. I worry about the way they're presenting to me and how that affects their place in the world. Trans men especially talk about, once they reach a certain point in their transition, the differences that they feel and how they're treated in society as these stealth men versus women. So if you're hearing men say, well, I'm being treated as a man and it's a very different experience, you cannot invalidate trans womanhood. So for me, in the conversation of erasure and in the conversation of something like Black Lives Matter, it's important that we say Black trans lives matter as well, in addition to that, as a kind of subsect of Black Lives Matter, because the extension of the institutionalized police brutality in this country is being reported, telling you that there's been a murder, telling you that there's been an issue. For example, again, in LA, these 3 women were attacked and police drove by. They didn't even stop to see what was going on. So there are also ways that when we are complicit to the violence, I feel like a lot of the conversation that we talk about has a lot to do with the ways that there is active violence on people. We're witnessing it, we're seeing it from police. But turning the other cheek is just as bad. And as some of my panelists have spoken before on this talk today, why does it take 7 times worth of a report before a woman who's being abused by somebody is actually taken seriously? So how many more trans people have to die, particularly at the hands of men who look like us, men who are Black and brown men of our community, brutalize Black trans women on a regular basis. Men in our community brutalize Black cis women on a regular basis. So I think for me, the biggest bridge in this conversation is to understand that as trans women, we are always fighting and championing for everybody. It is not only about us. And we need you guys to show up for us as well. So for me, in my work and in what I do, I write music that celebrates trans people. I write poetry that talks about very transparently our experiences and our things. And I also try to communicate with people about these things in really tangible and relatable ways, because I say that the trans experience is divine. I do. I feel very close to God every day because I've been placed in this world, in this body, and even in my existence here, I have to work on bringing my spirit forward. there is something really divine about that experience that I think a lot of people don't understand. And sometimes it does take certain kind of language and patience to get there. And, speaking of patience, patience is key. You're not going to get everything in one day, but we do need to be dedicated to learning. We need to be dedicated to listening and doing better. So thank you for having me here. It's been a very emotional time for the trans community at large. I would say also there was the video of Ayana Dior. It would be lost on me to not say her name as well today, who was attacked, I believe, in Minnesota as well, by a group of men at a gas station. And I call that like trauma porn because it's similar to the ways that we witness any kind of violent videography and it's shared constantly. It's triggering and it's traumatizing. And I feel like, I believe Janelle Monáe said something on the Hollywood Reporter panel where a lot of people were saying, oh, what a celebration for all these movements and these things. And she said, well, my people are being traumatized right now by everything we see. To me, there are great strides in this country worth celebrating, but every day I walk out of my house, I live in utter fear that something is going to happen to me in a way that I think only Black and brown trans women can fully grasp and understand. And to put it very plainly, I don't even like to date. These women are dying at the hands of men who more often than not are sexualizing them and then can't deal with what's going on in their own brains. So while this is a conversation also about the erasure and violence of women, we also need to be honest about the healing that has to happen in men here. Because when we're talking about the brutalization of women's bodies and the brutalization of women in media, that's often at the hands of men. And we need to get to the root of the problem there. And we need to allow men to be soft and kind and explorative and spiritual and open as well. And I hope that in kind of communicating these things with you guys today, we can kind of plant some seeds there. I also want to highlight Trans Trenders, which is the label that I just signed to. We are the first trans-founded, trans-operated music label, which is really cool. We're making history right now. And I hope that when young boys and girls and non-binary people like myself are looking to media and have things like Disclosure on Netflix, which I encourage everybody to watch, because again, transness is not new and they will show you that it's not new. And you turn to my music or the music of my other label mates, they can be inspired to know that we are allowed to exist. And it is really that simple. It is just that word. It's not about love. It's not about this. It's not about that. It's just about existing, about waiting for an Uber and not being bothered, about taking the subway and not being bothered, about walking down the street and not being bothered. So again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you guys including me in this conversation and giving us trans people a platform to continue the conversation and continue to bridge the gaps that we really feel are happening in hopes of a better future.
Thank you so much, Jay. Wow. So much of this work is bucking toxicity. I mean, that's really, that's so resonant in what you said. And I think something that will be so resonant to so many of our viewers today is your description of the unifying divinity of your individual experience. I think it's something that really does link all of us. And I really appreciate the lyricism in your presentation. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Next, I welcome our friend, Dr. Maisa Akbar. Dr. Akbar is a groundbreaking psychologist, best-selling author, and healer. You are a thought leader and an expert in racial trauma, allyship, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and you're just awesome. Welcome, Dr. Akbar.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. Oh man, the idea of badassness, right, just keeps like resonating through me as we are talking, and I am feeling the spiritual power of womanhood in this panel, and I am so appreciative. I don't take for granted these opportunities Oftentimes we're trying to run and survive and do all these things. The world is changing at a rapid pace. And, there are these like beautiful moments where like scripture just happens, right? Because you are like among the blessed. And that's how I feel right now. Thank you for blessing my soul and for me to have this opportunity to come together with all of you. I think that, when we have these conversations about the importance of erasure and the importance of saying her name and what that means to me, I was really trying to recite that today slowly. Say her name. Because I wanted to see how that felt to me if I had to think about it from a space of spiritually talking to myself about what it means to be in the grandest form of womanhood, right? And often we don't think about that from a spiritual lift, right? And as a psychologist, I'm always thinking about the other sides of this. What does trauma look like? What does racial trauma look like? What does resiliency look like? And I wanted to kind of stick that in my head as today's affirmation, not only for all of those that, have been erased, and for the women who we don't get to hear about and we don't get to talk about, we don't get to lift, and their voices who are missing. But I wanted to say that to myself almost as self-affirmation, saying my name and standing in my light, and I forget about that sometimes. We forget about that collectively sometimes, our importance. And that's what I wanted to lift today in this group, that I wanted to lift each and every one of you, because you are making the path. You continue to trailblaze. When we get tired, when our sisters get tired, you pick up the baton and you keep moving. And it is important for us to honor each other in this moment, and to lift each other in this moment. So I wanted to make sure that I spent that little bit of gratitude time to do that. I understand that in our society, there are so many multitudes of identity. Either you are a majority or a minority, and these dichotomies have been created so that there are the haves and the have-nots, right? There are definitions of what's normal and not normal, of what's essential and not essential. And, each of these identities are sometimes ranked as acceptable and oftentimes then deemed unacceptable. And when we have to survive and make it through life through judgment and these types of judgments that are placed on us, it's really difficult to find a way sometimes. Can I be accepted? Am I in the acceptable category? Am I normal or am I abnormal? To what majority do I belong to? Or am I stuck in the thinking and captured in the cave of abnormality, right? And these are the labels that we have to often fight through, and some of the shame that is placed on us, that we have to lift those clouds to be able to see clearly with one another. And whether that is in the name of sexual orientation, because we know that the closer you are to straight, the more accepted you are, or whether it's in the name of gender identity, because we know that the closer you are to cisgender, the more accepted that you are, or whether it's in the name of religion, because we know that the closer to Catholicism that you are, the more accepted you are, or in gender expression, because men are more accepted often than women. But you know what? The one for me that resonates the most, and the one that is most relevant to this conversation, is that of skin color. Because what we do understand and what society has ingrained in our head is that the lighter that you are, the more accepted that you are, until you're not. Because I will tell you, we have seen that one of the most unqualified people in these last few days have brought to question the Blackness of one of the most badass women right now that has formally accepted the majority party nomination, right? And what we need to make sure that we understand is that none of these categories are for sale. None of these categories are left to anyone's judgment. And I love the fact that we were able to lift the trailblazers that have come. You know, my soror, Shirley Chisholm, Shirley Anita Chisholm, who was the first woman to get elected to Congress and also became the first Black candidate of a major party's nomination for President of the United States of America. And I will go remiss without talking about Charlotta Bass, who was nominated as the first VP for a progressive party. So these are the names that we have got to say. We have got to say their names because those trailblazers allowed us to be in the situation that we are today. And I have to tell you, when I think about racial trauma and I think about the things that we have ignored, what Black women have had to endure from the time of slavery until today, nobody called that trauma. Nobody called the rape and the pillaging and the dehumanization trauma. Nobody thought about what that meant to the bodies of women all along as they were being, as their very spirit were being torn out of them. And nobody thinks about the fetal programming that happens generation after generation as that trauma gene carries on. And we have to exist in our mothers' lives and make sure that we're breaking cycles and legacies of trauma and legacies of poverty and legacies of brokenness. It is today where we say their names. It is today where we change all of that. And I am proud to be sitting here. And I'm proud to be part of this campaign. I'm proud to lift it in so many different ways, in understanding the multitude of identities, in lifting those identities, and in making sure that we are not going to allow the continued erasure of the horrible, horrible, and horrific deaths of Black women, of cisgender women, of trans women. You know, when people talk to me about allyship and I write about allyship, I say, men, step up, be an ally. I say, it's time, right? Let's dismantle what you created, that patriarchy. You need to be at the forefront of that fight, right? And when I think about anti-racism and when people talk about anti-Black racism, I say, well, what about anti-Black and trans racism? How about we fight that, right? So let's be thinking about this. Here's my last piece of word, because I know, Stephen, you're looking at me, you're like, girl, stop preaching. Okay. Oh. It's not only by understanding the way in which the society ranks the persons that live here and what they mean, that we are able to see ourselves. We need to see ourselves every single day, our beauty, our Blackness, our womanhood, whether young, whether old, it doesn't matter, because we will never be forgotten. We have changed the world. Every generation, we have changed the world. We are here to stay. We are here to be seen. We are here to be heard. And we will not let not their legacy pass by, not our grandmother's legacies pass by, and our mother's legacies pass by. We are here to ensure that we will continue to fight the good fight. And those that must be punished and be held accountable will. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me life today, y'all. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. You know, there are places where you really do lose a sense of time and space, and you just want to simmer in that moment. And that's how I've been feeling with each of your presentations. And thank you for keeping us there and allowing us to simmer. I bet you oftentimes when people are watching presentations and conversations like these, they wonder, what can I do? Well, what I'm going to say is, after every one of these presentations, hit rewind, because you're hearing what you can do. So thank you so much, Dr. Akbar. I'd like to turn next to my friend and colleague, Muimui Hin McCormick. Muimui is the Clinical Director of Adult Residential Services at Rushford Center and also chairs the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, in addition to being the Asian Pacific Islander Subcommission Interim Chair for our commission. She is the Vice Chair of the APAC, which is the Asian Pacific American Coalition for the state of Connecticut. Years of service and years of gratitude. Welcome, Muimui.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for the commission to really pull this together. Wow. I mean, I think after each presentation, that's what my reaction or response is wow. I am so grateful for each of you and all the work that you do, because our young generations have hope, right? Each of us are committed to and devoted to this work. I know I do for my child. I know each of us does for personal and professional reasons. I am so inspired that my daughter and her generation have role models like each of you. I know growing up, you know, this topic has always been an issue, right? It's always come up. And I think coming from an Asian community, also known as one of the most invisible communities that we have, it definitely is described as, you know, invisible. A lot of community members feel that they've never been heard or seen. And I think, you know, having moments like this and creating opportunities like this is absolutely amazing, because our children will not have to go with the history that was there. The history that has been traumatizing our kids from generation to generation. The history and cycle can be broken, and I think each of you have definitely shown from the work and passion that you have that change can happen. So from my perspective, I think, you know, from the Asian community perspective, like I said, we've been invisible, we've been seen as invisible, we've been described as passive, we've been questioned as why aren't members coming to the forefront and fighting for social injustice as other community members have. I definitely have noticed a huge change from what has been happening and what we've been seeing to where we are today. We have been able to see a historical movement of just individuals from, you know, from young to older, every single culture and color represent and march for civil justice. It's been amazing to be able to be part of, and it's been amazing to watch. I always think of some of the role models that I've had, or, you know, some women and girls from the Asian community. One of those is, you know, you have Representative Patsy Takemoto Mink. She was amazing in what she did. Her trade was really practicing law. She had to go through an enormous amount of discrimination and harassment because she was a female woman of color trying to practice law. And repeatedly she was told, you need to be home cooking, raising kids, right? But she persevered, she continued. And then she ended up being elected as a US representative. She also spearheaded Title 19, huge policy that protects a lot of the people that we are trying to advocate for. And then you have, you know, Senator Tammy Duckworth, another Asian role model who not only represents the Southeast Asian community, but she's a double amputee, right? She lost not only body parts, but was traumatized while serving in war. And for her to be able to be up there, visible, showing that no matter what hardship she has gone through, she will still continue to do the right thing and be present and available for her community and for the communities around her. I think that's another great role model for our kids to be able to have. And then you have an author, you know, Jane Wynn. People may not hear of her, but she really talked a lot about the bamboo ceiling effect, right? It's talking about issues of diversity and being marginalized and not being able to get the promotions, even though you were well qualified for, but your gender and your race impacts that ability to be able to get promoted or recognized for the work that you do. You have the model minority that was coined back in the 60s, depicting the Asian community as a model minority. There should be no model minority, right? So that in itself is already ironic to know that the model minority existed to separate individuals, to separate groups, to bring a lot of chaos and, to throw things off as culture versus culture, right? Asians versus Blacks or Asians versus whoever. Because the model minority was, they did what they were supposed to, they stayed quiet, they didn't make any waves, and that's how you're supposed to be. That's not what we should be teaching our children. We need to make sure that we include pieces like that in history to show what true history was. And that's something that I think we have a lot of work that we still need to do in our school systems. Our school systems are teaching history that are benefiting a certain group of people, the majority. And we need to be real with our children. We need to be real with the curriculum. And we need to show that a lot of bad history happened and is repeating itself, but there is a chance and opportunity for us to be able to make sure that change happens. Another, concept that is really ringing and comes up a lot is the perpetual foreigner concept. For those of you who don't know, it is reflective of the Asian community a lot, because the perpetual foreigner basically states no matter what you do to be American, you are never seen as American because of where you come from or what you look like. Commonly when I was growing up, a lot of times it was, where are you from? I wasn't born in the United States, which is fine, right? So I say. But for other people who are born in the United States, like my daughter, they will be questioned, no, really, where are you from? I'm from Hartford, Connecticut. No, really, where are you from? I am from, give the street in Hartford, Connecticut. No, really, where are you from? So basically it's questioning again their existence of being American. What is American? And the perception from that person questioning as to what true America looks like. We have younger generations that identify themselves more as American than Asian. And I think it creates a lot of confusion and a lot of issues for individuals trying to really find their own identity, but not know where they fall. And I think speakers already said this in the beginning, is trying to find your place. If you're not part of the majority, you belong with the minority, but then what minority group do you belong to? So I think this is definitely work that each of us value and hold true. And I think all of us have a personal stake and a professional stake in it. I really feel like for Asian community women, accessing services like domestic violence, sexual assault, behavioral health, mental health needs, addiction needs, just overall accessing health for Asian women is very, very difficult and challenging because it's not supported by the culture. And it becomes a lot more of how do we as providers try to open up access and reach people where they are so that those women are not suffering and continue to suffer, that they know that there is help out there for them, that they know that there are great organizations like some that have been mentioned already that they can access. It's really trying to figure out how we can reach those communities and those groups that continue to suffer because they feel like they are in this by themselves. And I can end by saying that I still am very hopeful and I am very grateful for each of you and your continued work. I think, everybody needs to be able to come to the table and share resources and collaborate and partner. We don't have a lot of resources and funding that are out there, but I think if we try to pull together our resources, we can definitely partner and be creative as to how we address certain issues. Bottom line, we're all human. And when you get hurt or cut, we bleed red, right? It doesn't matter what color skin we have. It doesn't matter where we grew up or how we grew up. So I think it's really about trying to figure out how we can work together versus against. In the times that people try to separate us by focusing on our differences, we have to push back and really push forward and be progressive to emphasize that we have a lot of similarities as well. So thank you again for letting me join this panel discussion. I definitely look forward to continued work that we can do together.
Thank you so much, Mui Mui. And thank you for that, just for not only for your continued leadership, because I think you're right, there is a lot of work to be done, but also for the generosity of your intersectionality, the way that you think across silo and really do promote that allyship and that unity of purpose. It's a real pleasure to work with you in the commission, Lindley. Next, I'd like to turn to Robin McCallan. Robin McCallan is the founder and as of August 14th of this year, the former executive director of True Colors. And Robin, I just have to say, you know, the very first time I met you, it was at a True Colors conference at UConn. And when I saw the sea of young people for whom you had just presented and to whom you had just presented, and I knew the days of programming that you had created and had effectuated over the years, I realized then and there that you're a lifesaver. And all of the work that you've done over the years has saved countless lives. And for that, I'm eternally grateful to you, as are so many of us in our community. So welcome, Robin.
Thank you. Thank you. It's weird to not start with my normal way, which is about True Colors. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to really cry. I'm not. But I have to start this way anyway, because it's my thing, right? Y'all know it's my thing. That over the last 30 years, I have been working with lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, queer questioning, two-spirit, same gender loving, pansexual, flexual, not straight, not labeling, straightish, straight so far, straight with options, straight but stuff happens, gender bending, bigender, pangender, agender, asexual, non-binary, and other sexual and gender minority youth. And the youth continue to lead the way. I think one of the things that's kept me young all these years is working with young people who know that part of their job is to push the envelope and is to sort of grow who we all can be as human beings. And, you know, certainly I've witnessed much of the trauma and much of the difficulties, as well as much of the joy. I've been very inspired listening to everyone. And I don't know why this poem just kept coming up for me over and over again as I was listening. So I'm going to read it to you. It's by a man, but it's his name is G. Winston James, and it was written in 1995, which was just the year after the conference opened. It's called Uprising. I want to start a campaign, one that gets homosexuals to recall what it means to be gay, a campaign that will scrape away at millennia's worth of stone to unearth the legions of sissified warriors who lived, died, and worked their magic in, on, and about this world. I want to ignite a protest to gather all the mystics in one place, that we might speak that one truth that will suck the moisture from the air and create oceans at our feet, that truth that will snuff out the light and remind the children that we have been here since creation. I want to also invoke the Bible, to say that in the beginning was the Word, and that Word shaped the universe into a thing of so many wonders that mortal man can only fail to see unless he admits that he is as blind as the stars and far less significant than the trees that have survived far longer than he. I want to summon the truth of names and the defining energy that dwells within them, to let the mouths of our enemies show us that they have always known that we were defined by power. As the fairy's magic lives, the flame of the faggot burns, the strength of the dyke holds, and the gaiety of the queer endures. I want to ignite a blaze, a conflagration of lesbians who remember what it was like to watch their sisters burn in the night, struggling against the fetters that bound them to the witching posts and to the lies and to the angry penises, jealous of feminine power so softly displayed, like iron at the hot core of the earth. I want us to shatter the windows of heaven with diamonds, to assemble before the throne of God, dressed in the stars and holding the planets in our hands, asking the angels simply, are we not beautiful? That the rivers and the wind sing our names in the gloaming? If we are not, then destroy the world, for you have put nothing marvelous in it. that is one of my favorite poems of all time. It reminds me of the struggle. It reminds me that there's still a ways to go, and that there's also been, that we've come a long way, and that there's still so much more to do. Last year, CSSD, Court Support Services Division, did a pilot program where they asked about the sexual orientation and gender identity of every young person coming into detention and coming into a couple of the different probation offices. And what they found was that the numbers in Connecticut mirrored the national numbers, that 38% of the girls in the juvenile justice system in that study identified somewhere on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, 38%. And of that 38% of girls, 85% were girls of color. When people talked about the push out of pushing kids out of school, of the detention, of the access to, of putting people into to the juvenile justice system, right? It's girls of color and LGBT girls of color that are bearing the brunt of what's happening. In the child welfare system, we know that LGBTQ plus youth represent somewhere, it depends on the study that you look at, maybe 5 to 11% of the population. Well, they represent up to 30% of the, or 14% of the population in child welfare, and 25 to 40% of the homeless youth population. And as much as things have changed, they have not changed at all. That there are kids, sometimes a kid comes out and everybody's fine. Their family's fine, their school's fine, everybody's fine. Sometimes a kid comes out and their whole world implodes. And they lose everything. They lose their family. We've got 40 kids. True Colors has 40 kids in the mentoring program, all of whom have been rejected by their families of origin on the basis of that child's sexual orientation or gender identity and expression, right? So things change and they don't change. But what I think, one of the things that I find really hopeful is, as the Black Lives Matter movement has gone forward, and in Connecticut in particular, with exceptions, obviously, like Pamela and John Selders and a number of other folks, but a lot of the leadership of the movement in Connecticut is young people, and a number of those young people are young queer people, right? And I think that those young people give me hope, because they understand that no one is free until everyone is free, that Black lives matter, that Black trans lives matter, that women's lives matter, and that they get, like, all the ways that these things come together, that it's not just about marriage, y'all, right? Marriage is sweet, but it isn't about that. It's about all of the other things that we need as humans to move forward and to create a world in which every human being is free to be who they are authentically and gets to be loved and celebrated for all of those parts of themselves. So, yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much for your leadership and for your grace for forever. It's no mystery. Yesterday we had a conversation. Professor Yancey pointed out a conversation that we had about a federal effort to erase trans and non-binary people from housing opportunity and shelter opportunity.
Right.
So I think you're right. I think the work continues and the work becomes ever more urgent, as does our fellowship. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Can I say just one more quick thing? I know I'm sorry, but there's True Colors just signed on to a national lawsuit that is challenging the Health and Human Services decision to stop asking states to count LGBTQ plus children in child welfare and in juvenile justice, because the reality is, if you can't count us, you can't serve us. And that's true sort of across the board in all the different ways that people are invisibilized. I know that's not a word, but I really like it. That people are invisibilized, and the people who are invisibilized are the ones who are least likely to be counted and therefore least likely to get their needs met. So I won't interrupt you again, I promise. In fact, I'm hitting mute.
No, thank you. Thank you so much. This is your floor, and I love the term invisibilize, because, you know, if this commission stands for anything and against anything, it's anti-invisibilization of the people that we represent. So I'm going to keep stressing and pressing that word. Thank you so much, Robin. And finally, I'd like to turn to my inspiration and co-conspirator in this conversation, Representative Robin Porter. Welcome, Representative.
Thank you, Stephen. Oh man, I just want to take a moment, and I just want us all take a deep breath. Because so much has been said here today. And right now I'm so full. So just pray my strength, y'all. Because you ladies, you phenomenal women that you are, laid something on my spirit and my soul that is heavy in a way that is enriching, empowering. And I want to start off by saying thank you. You know, it's so funny. I can tell the women that, you know, I'm really connected to. And there's one, Dr. Maisa Adbar is my sounding board, my conscience when I'm totally depleted and don't know my front from my back. Britt, you know, you and I have done a lot of work together. Teresa, my God, who doesn't look up to you? You know, just phenomenal women, each and every one of you. And I know that we're saying, you know, this is about women erased, when they lead and when they suffer. And we started out, you know, talking about many of the women that I thought to mention have been mentioned, but we can never mention them enough. So I'll start with the women that have gone on that I thought about, that have inspired me and led me along this journey unknowingly to this point in that journey. Harriet Tubman, you know, and the thing I remember most about Harriet, she said, I would have freed more slaves if they had only known that they were enslaved. Fannie Lou Hamer, my God, one of my mantras, sick and tired of being sick and tired, you know. Constance Baker Motley, right here in New Haven, gives me great pride. Sojourner Truth. And then, you know, I think about the ones that are here that, you know, depending on where you live and what your circle looks like, you may know them and you may not. They're not yet taught in the history books. And these are the unsung heroes that I want to lift up. And I want to start with what you all symbolize to me. Women warriors. And when I think about women warriors, how many of you have seen, and I'm pretty sure all of us, Black Panther? So Black Panther, you know, we talk about Wakanda, and we think that it was just a conception and an idea, but that was something that was actually really real. And it was, you know, a Hosi of Dahomey, or the Dahomey Amazon. They inspired Black Panther writers to put that movie forward. And they were all-female military regiment that was created by King Huabagaja in the 19th century. And they were chosen for their incredible ability to fight men. Often recruited as virgin teenagers, the fierce women would live in the royal palace in what was then called Kingdom of Dahomey, now known as the modern-day Republic of Benin. And they call themselves Nnamatan, which means, yes, our mothers. And they dedicated their efforts to weapons training, protecting the king on the bloodiest of battlefields. And these women made up different units, each with its own battle song. And today, our song is for the unsung. And there are many that I've had interactions with, past and current, and I hope to be present. And I want to say their names, because oftentimes women do the work, but we oftentimes get left out. We don't get the credit. We get dismissed, disposable units of whatever it is we're being used for. And today, I want to lift up Barbara Fear, who I have affectionately named Mother Justice here in New Haven. She has been fighting this battle for criminal justice and juvenile justice for decades. And she has been instrumental in helping myself and other legislators such as Senator Winfield get some very critical work done. Most recent, the Police Accountability Bill, Barbara Fear. Then we have Black Lives Matter, and we have talked about that movement, but I am proud to say that New Haven, Black Lives Matter is making a real big imprint on this movement. And oftentimes, these sisters, their names are not said. So today in this space, I want to pay homage to Lauren Essence, AKA Sun Queen, Arisha Allah Achimari. And then we have a very fiery, fierce Latina, Boricua, Addis Castillo. And she leads the New Haven Citywide Youth Coalition. And I want to bring that to the forefront because of the importance that our young people are doing in this movement as they're being undergirded by us, their elders. And when we talk about the assault, and I want to talk about this because a lot of times when we step out and we're not afraid to stand in our truth, we are assassinated, we are criticized, we are marginalized, we are oppressed, sabotaged, undermined. And there's a fierce spirit of intimidation that threads all of this, that keeps us in I will call it a spirit of the complex, Lord, I'm on a blank, the imposter syndrome. And when I say that, I speak as someone that has actually experienced that. And I would like to say that it doesn't happen anymore, but it does. And as we talk about that imposter syndrome, I want to speak from the perspective of a Black woman, a Black leader, a Black legislator, a Black lawmaker, and what that looks like. And Lysa, you mentioned, the fact that we do have Claudette, Charlotta Bass, who was the first Black woman to ever win the nomination for vice president. So I want to say her name again. You can never say the name enough. And she brought something to the platform in 1952 that was totally remarkable. And yes, she was running on the progressive ticket. And the one thing that I read that she said that really stuck in my mind, I'm going to read a quote. This is a historic moment in American political life. She told the crowd in Chicago in her acceptance speech. Historic for women, for myself, for my people, for all women. For the first time in the history of the nation, a political party has chosen a Negro woman for the second highest office in the land. And I close my eyes at times and I try to imagine what it was like to carry that mantle. And then I think about women like Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Waters. And I am reminded that I have often been called the Maxine Waters of New Haven. And that comes with a tremendous mantle to carry. And when we think about it, and I talk about the way that we serve and the way that we show up and the way that we own what it is we know, our lived experience in a space and a platform that is controlled by white men, I'm here to tell you, it is something that will wear you out. But it's because of these women that I find strength. And what I like to say about them and many others, including yourselves, the wind beneath my wings, the strength that I draw on when I have no strength left, the ability to stand when I've done all I can do to stand. And there's one other person that I want to mention out of Hartford that has made a great impression on me. a beautiful Black queen by the name of Melinda Johnson. And when I think about the work that Melinda Johnson is doing in Hartford, Connecticut, and the way that she is leading during this movement, she has inspired me. And she tells me that I do that for her. So what I want to take the opportunity to do at this time is just to remind each and every one of us that as powerful as we are, and to all the power that we have access to all the things that we have been able to accomplish and the things yet to come, the reminder is that we are inspired by the people we inspire. And I want everyone to understand that we don't do this alone, that we do it as a team. And when I look at this panel and I see the power being displayed, the stories that have been told, and the way we hold space, I can't find a word for it. I think of empowering, but it's so much more than that. It's so much bigger than that. And I think that in a time where we are struggling with COVID and dealing with the disparities and the impacts that it has, specifically on communities of color, we do not see, well, I do not see this as a golden opportunity. I see it as a golden obligation. And thank you to you, Mr. Steve Hernandez, for allowing us to have this platform to stand on as we say their names. And I know that the time is running short and we were supposed to be done at 2:30, but I will wrap up with this. I want to say, Mike, I think it was you, Dr. Akbar, that talked about spiritual power. And I want to talk about the spiritual power of our women ancestors. And I want to take the opportunity to lift them up. And for me personally, these are the women whose direct shoulders that I stand on. And the first one I will start with is my beloved grandmother, maternal grandmother, Elma Rogers, also affectionately known as Grandma Elma. And we lost her to the spiritual world because she's still with me, she's still with us. But she was there for us. I was raised by my grandmother. My grandmother was the mommy. My mom went out and worked as many jobs as she needed to work to make ends meet. And when I started to look back on what my grandmother accomplished in her life, and to know that she was the first to ever serve as a nurse assistant in the doctor's office in Chiro, South Carolina, and Dr. Funderburg's office, those are the shoulders, direct shoulders that I stand on. That is a woman that has inspired me and continues to inspire me day in and day out, second by second. Alberta Patrick, these are my grandmothers. Mildred Porter, my great-grandmother, Lizzie Mae Patrick, Lillian Porter, and the queen and now matriarch of my family, Marilyn Porter, my mother. And a very special say her name salute to my maternal Titi, my auntie, the Honorable Judge Vivian Lynette Patrick. And I bring all of that up to say that as we continue to lead and suffer, that we continue to draw strength from one another, as we are doing here today on this platform. I salute each and every one of you. As a domestic violence survivor, I so related to what you shared, Debbie, and the reasons why that is the case and why women end up dying in those kind of relationships, and many don't make it out. But I also want to pay tribute to the minority of the men that are domestic violence victims and survivors. And I also want to say, Stephen, you have always done such a phenomenal job in bringing together women, men of all likes and all terms to make statements that need to be made in such moments as this. And I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be a part of this platform. And as I close out, I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you. You literally have taken my breath away. And you brought a refreshing perspective to me, to my ideas, to the concepts that I will carry back to that building as we legislate and bring laws into effect. I want you to know that what each and every one of you said has resonated and will continue to be the fire in my belly and the fire under my feet that keep me going when I feel like there's just nothing left. There's nothing left to give. You all have given me today enough to carry me for an eternity. So I want to personally thank each and every one of you for what you've said, for what you've done, for what you do, and what you will continue to do in the spirit of warrior women, phenomenal women that we are. Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you all.
Thank you, Robin. And thank all of you, all of our panelists. With that, with Robin's beautiful words, I now adjourn this meeting.